Sign the papers, Jason, or I will ruin your reputation, dismantle your company, and leave you with nothing but the clothes on your back. My wife of 3 years, Qley, sneered as she slammed a thick stack of legal documents onto our custom mahogany dining table. She stood there in her designer silk robe, looking at me with a cold, calculated disdain that I had never seen before in the 4 years we had been together. Beside her stood her mother, Evelyn, a woman who had never liked me but had always loved my bank account, nodding in smug agreement as she sipped from a cup of coffee I had paid for. The papers were a divorce petition, but they were not just any divorce papers. They contained a demand so outrageous it made my blood run cold. Qley was demanding 50% of Apex Route, the logistics software company I had founded, built, and scaled to a $30 million valuation 5 years before I even knew she existed. We had an airtight prenuptial agreement that explicitly protected my premarital assets, but as I glanced at the petition, I saw her lawyer was arguing the prenup was invalid due to systemic commingling of assets and active contribution. You built this company, but I made it a brand, Qley said, her voice dripping with artificial confidence as she crossed her arms. My lawyers will prove that my consulting work over the last 3 years increased your company value by 40% and under state law. That appreciation is marital property. She was referring to her self-appointed title as our lifestyle brand consultant, a position I had created just to give her something to do, which consisted of her showing up to the office twice a month, ordering expensive organic lunches on the company card, and posting aesthetic pictures on Instagram. I looked up at her, my heart hammering against my ribs, trying to process the sheer audacity of the woman I had slept next to just the night before. You did absolutely nothing for Apex Route except drain its promotional budget for your personal shopping sprees, I said, my voice remarkably calm despite the absolute storm raging inside my chest. Evelyn stepped forward, pointing a manicured finger at my face, her voice shrill and venomous. Do not speak to my daughter that way, you ungrateful tech geek, she hissed. Without Qley, you would still be a lonely, socially awkward programmer sitting in a dark room eating instant noodles. She brought you into high society, she gave you a face, and she is going to take what she is rightfully owed. Qley smiled, a slow, malicious curve of her lips that made me realize I had been sleeping next to a viper. You have 48 hours to agree to a quiet settlement, Jason, or my attorney, Arthur Vance, will drag you through the public mud, accuse you of financial fraud, and make sure your board of directors fires you before the ink on our divorce is even dry. With that final threat, Qley and her mother walked out of the house, leaving me alone in the silent, echoing dining room of the $5 million mansion I had bought with my own hard-earned money. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the white pages of the divorce petition, feeling a sickening sense of betrayal wash over me. I had loved Qley. I had given her a life of unimaginable luxury, paid off her student loans, bought her parents a house in Florida, and funded her failed organic skincare startup to the tune of $300,000. This was how she repaid me, by trying to steal the company I had sacrificed my youth, my health, and my sanity to build from scratch. I immediately called my primary corporate attorney and lifelong friend, Richard, and explained the situation. Richard arrived at my house within 30 minutes, his expression grim as he took the divorce papers and began scanning through the legal jargon. This is bad, Jason, Richard said, rubbing his temples as he flipped through the pages. Arthur Vance is a vicious legal shark who specializes in dismantling prenups for wealthy spouses, and he is playing extremely dirty here. He is claiming that you used marital funds to pay off early company debts, and that Qley's advisory role was essential to your latest funding round. But that is a complete lie, I protested, slamming my fist onto the table. We never commingled funds. I kept all my premarital accounts strictly separate, and her consulting role was a joke. I know it is a lie, and you know it is a lie, but in a courtroom, a clever lawyer can twist financial transactions to look incredibly suspicious to a judge who doesn't understand tech logistics, Richard warned. We need to hire a private investigator and a high-level forensic accountant immediately because something about this sudden attack feels incredibly coordinated and rushed. Richard's words stuck with me, and the next day I hired Sarah, a brilliant forensic accountant who had previously worked with the federal government on corporate fraud cases. I also hired a discreet private investigator named Marcus, who began looking into Qley's daily activities and her inner circle. Within 48 hours, Sarah had set up a secure digital war room in a spare office at Apex Route, diving deep into 5 years of corporate bank statements, tax returns, and personal accounts. At the same time, I had to go to work and pretend everything was normal, which was made infinitely harder by the behavior of my chief operating officer, Derek. Derek had been my second-in-command for 4 years, a man I trusted implicitly and to whom I had given a 5% equity stake in the company as a reward for his loyalty. But over the last few days, I noticed Derek was acting incredibly distant, avoiding eye contact during executive meetings and asking weird, probing questions about our proprietary source code backups. "Is everything okay with the divorce proceedings, Jason?" Derek asked me in the hallway one afternoon, his voice carrying a strange, nervous tremor. "I heard some rumors that Qley's lawyers are going to freeze our corporate assets during the litigation." I looked at him, noticing how his hands were stuffed deep into his pockets, his eyes darting toward my office door. "Don't worry about the rumors, Derek," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Our legal team has everything under control, and the company's operations won't be affected at all." He nodded quickly, too quickly, and muttered something about a meeting before rushing down the corridor. A cold chill ran down my spine, a gut instinct telling me that Derek's anxiety had nothing to do with concern for the company's well-being. That night, Sarah called me into the secure office, her face illuminated by the glow of 3 large monitors displaying complex spreadsheets and transaction paths. "Jason, we have a major problem, and it is much worse than just a greedy wife wanting a divorce," she said, her voice deadly serious. I pulled up a chair, my chest tightening as she pointed to a series of transactions highlighted in bright red. "Over the past 18 months, there have been systematic wire transfers from your secondary corporate marketing account to a shell company registered in Delaware called Nova Logistics Consulting," Sarah explained. "The total amount transferred is just over $1.8 million. I stared at the numbers, my mind spinning. I never authorized any payments to a company called Nova Logistics Consulting. Who signed off on these transfers? Sarah clicked her mouse, bringing up a series of digital authorization forms. Your chief operating officer, Derek, signed off on every single one of them, classifying them as external brand strategy fees. But here is the real kicker, Jason. I ran a deep background search on Nova Logistics Consulting. The sole registered owner and beneficiary of that Delaware shell corporation is Qley. I felt like the room was spinning, the air completely leaving my lungs as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place with horrifying clarity. My wife and my trusted chief operating officer were stealing millions of dollars from my company right under my nose. But it got worse. Sarah clicked another tab, displaying a series of encrypted email threads she had recovered from the company's backup servers. Derek had been using his corporate laptop to communicate with Qley's personal, unindexed email account. They were not just stealing money, they were planning a complete hostile takeover of my life. The emails detailed a plan to deliberately inflate Qley's perceived value to Apex Route while systematically tanking my reputation with our board of directors. Derek was feeding Qley's lawyer, Arthur Vance, confidential financial data, altered corporate resolutions, and fabricated emails that made it look like I had promised Qley half the company as a wedding gift. And there was one more thing, a detail that broke my heart into a million pieces. The emails contained intimate, highly graphic messages between Qley and Derek, dating back to over 2 years ago. They were having an affair in my own home, in my office, and at the luxury hotels I paid for during corporate retreats. My wife was sleeping with my best friend and business partner, and together, they were plotting to destroy me, take my company, and launch their own rival logistics firm using my proprietary technology. I stood up, pacing the room as a wave of pure, unadulterated rage threatened to consume me. I wanted to run to Qley's hotel, confront her, scream at her, and throw Derek out of the building. But Richard, who had just walked into the room and heard the discovery, grabbed my shoulder with a firm, steadying grip. "Do not say a single word to either of them," Jason, Richard warned, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity. "If you confront them now, they will destroy the evidence, claim we hacked their accounts illegally. And Vance will use your anger against you in court to make you look unstable. We play this quiet, we play this smart, and we let them think they are winning until we are ready to strike the fatal blow." I took a deep breath, forcing the rage down, replacing it with a cold, calculating determination to destroy them both legally, financially, and socially. "What is our next move?" I asked, looking at Richard and Sarah. "First, we need to let them proceed with their legal strategy," Richard said, a ruthless smile playing on his lips. "They think they have you cornered, so they will push for a formal deposition next week to force you into a settlement. We will agree to the deposition, but we will demand that both Qley and Derek are present as co-defendants and corporate witnesses. In the meantime, Sarah will continue to trace every single dollar of that stolen $1.8 million, and our private investigator will gather physical evidence of their affair." Over the next week, I had to play the role of the defeated, desperate husband. I stopped going to the office as frequently, pretending to be too depressed to work, while actually working 18 hours a day with my legal team from a secret hotel suite. I watched through our home security cameras as Qley returned to our mansion when she knew I wouldn't be there, packing up her expensive jewelry, designer clothes, and even some of my valuable art pieces. She looked incredibly happy, laughing on the phone with someone who I now knew was Derek. I also observed Derek at the office through a hidden network monitoring software Sarah had installed on his system. He was actively downloading our core source code, the proprietary algorithm that gave Apex Route its competitive edge, onto an external encrypted drive. He was going to steal my entire life's work, package it under their new shell company, and leave me with a hollowed-out husk of a business. I let him do it, instructing Sarah to create a digital honeypot, a modified version of the source code that looked complete but contained subtle, catastrophic bugs that would make the software completely non-functional after 30 days of deployment. Derek downloaded the poison code, thinking he had secured the crown jewels of Apex Route. Meanwhile, my private investigator, Marcus, delivered a massive folder containing high-definition photographs and video footage of Qley and Derek meeting at a secluded beach house I owned in Malibu. The footage showed them kissing, laughing, and toast ing with expensive champagne, celebrating their imminent victory over me. They were so arrogant, so utterly convinced of their own intellectual superiority, that they didn't even bother to check if they were being followed. Finally, the day of the joint deposition arrived. We met at the high-rise offices of Arthur Vance, a luxurious, sterile environment designed to intimidate opposing clients. Qley arrived looking radiant, wearing a pristine white designer suit, flanked by her mother, Evelyn, who looked at me with a triumphant, condescending smirk. Derek arrived shortly after, wearing a tailored suit, pretending to look concerned for me as he sat down at the long glass conference table. "Jason, I am only here as a neutral corporate witness to ensure the company's interests are protected," Derek said, his voice dripping with false empathy. "I hope you understand this is just business." I looked at him, giving him a faint, weary nod, playing my part of the broken man perfectly. "Of course, Derek, I understand," I murmured. Arthur Vance, a tall, imposing man with slicked-back hair and a sharp, expensive suit, adjusted his glasses and looked at me across the table. "Mr. Sterling, we are here today to discuss a fair settlement that avoids a lengthy, public, and highly damaging trial," Vance began, his voice booming with authority. "My client, Qley Sterling, is prepared to accept 50% of your equity in Apex Route, valued at $15 million, along with the Malibu estate and the primary residence. In exchange, she will sign a non-disclosure agreement and waive any future claims to alimony. If you refuse, We will present evidence to the court showing that you systematically commingled marital funds, falsified corporate tax returns to hide profits from your wife, and committed severe financial fraud. Vance slid a folder across the table containing the fabricated emails and altered corporate resolutions that Derek had helped them create. I looked at the documents, then looked at Qley, who was leaning back in her chair, a look of smug satisfaction on her face. "You really think you can take my company from me, Qley?" I asked softly, looking directly into her cold eyes. "It is not your company anymore, Jason," she replied, her voice sharp and vindictive. "We built this together, and I am taking what is mine. You are nothing without me, and it is time you realized that." I turned my gaze to Derek, who immediately looked down at his legal notepad, unable to meet my eyes. "And you, Derek," I said. "You agree with this? You think this is fair to the man who gave you a job, gave you equity, and treated you like a brother?" Derek cleared his throat, adjusting his tie, his voice shaking slightly. "The numbers don't lie, Jason. Qley's contributions to the brand were substantial, and the financial records my department prepared show clear commingling. I have a fiduciary duty to the board to tell the truth." I let out a long, slow sigh, leaning back in my chair, and looked at my attorney, Richard. Richard nodded, a cold, predatory smile spreading across his face as he opened his leather briefcase. "Well, Mr. Vance, we have reviewed your demands, and we have brought some of our own evidence to this deposition," Richard said, his voice calm, measured, and terrifyingly confident. "Before we discuss any settlement, we would like to present a few exhibits for the record." Richard reached over and plugged a sleek black laptop into the large presentation screen on the wall of the conference room. Qley and Vance exchanged a brief, dismissive glance, while Derek shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Let's start with Exhibit A," Richard announced, pressing a key on the laptop. The screen lit up with a high-definition video. It was the security footage from my Malibu beach house. The video showed Qley and Derek walking into the living room, kissing passionately, and throwing their clothes onto the floor before falling onto the sofa. The audio was crystal clear. They were laughing about how stupid I was, how easy it was to steal my money, and how they were going to use the stolen source code to build their new company, Nova Logistics. Qley's face strained of all color instantly, her eyes widening in sheer terror as she stared at the screen. Derek gasped, his hands flying to his mouth, his face turning a sickly, pale white. "What is the meaning of this?" Vance shouted, slamming his hand on the table, trying to regain control of the room. "This is a cheap invasion of privacy, and it is completely irrelevant to the division of corporate assets." "Oh, we are just getting started, Mr. Vance," Richard replied smoothly, pressing another key on the laptop. "Let's look at Exhibit B, which directly addresses your claims of commingling and Qley's financial contributions." The screen changed to display a detailed flowchart of the $1.8 million that had been systematically embezzled from Apex Route 2, Qley's Delaware shell company, Nova Logistics Consulting. Beside the flowchart were the digital authorization logs, showing Derek's encrypted signature, along with the IP addresses from which the transfers were authorized, which traced directly to Derek's home address and Qley's personal laptop. "This is a comprehensive record of corporate embezzlement, grand larceny, and interstate wire fraud," Richard explained, his voice echoing in the dead silent room. "A total of $1.8 million of Apex Route's corporate funds were stolen by your client and my client's chief operating officer to fund their personal luxury lifestyles and prepay their upcoming legal fees for your services, Mr. Vance." Vance stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, looking at the documents on the screen, then down at Qley, who was now trembling violently, tears of panic streaming down her face. Derek looked like he was about to vomit, his chest heaving as he stared at the absolute ruin of his life displayed on the screen. "But wait, there is more," Richard continued, enjoying every single second of their slow-motion destruction. "Let's look at Exhibit C." The screen displayed a series of emails between Derek and Qley detailing the exact fabrication of the corporate resolutions and emails that you just presented to us, Mr. Vance. They physically altered corporate documents from 3 years ago and forged Jason's digital signature to make it look like he promised Qley 50% of the company. We have the original server logs, the metadata showing the exact date and time Derek modified these files last week, and the original unedited documents. This is not just a civil matter anymore, Mr. Vance. This is a criminal conspiracy, document forgery, corporate espionage, and major financial fraud. Qley turned to her mother, her voice high and hysterical. Mom, do something, tell them they can't do this, she screamed, grabbing Evelyn's arm. Evelyn, however, looked completely paralyzed, her previous smugness entirely replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror as she realized her daughter's rich lifestyle and her own financial pipeline was about to vanish forever. Vance slowly sat back down in his chair, his aggressive demeanor completely deflated as he looked at Richard with a defeated, professional respect. What are your terms? Vance asked, his voice barely a whisper. Richard closed his laptop with a sharp, satisfying snap. Our terms are non-negotiable, and they must be agreed to right here, right now, Richard stated, his voice hard as steel. First, Qley will sign a total waiver of any and all claims to Apex Route, our primary residence, the Malibu Beach house, and any other asset owned by Jason. She will walk away with absolutely nothing, no alimony, no lump sum, not a single penny. Second, she will return all the jewelry, art, and personal property she stole from the mansion over the past week. Or we will file immediate grand theft charges. Third, Derek will sign a full resignation letter, forfeit his 5% equity stake in Apex Route back to the company for $0, and sign a confession detailing his role in the embezzlement. If both of them sign these documents right now, Jason will agree not to press immediate criminal charges for the embezzlement, allowing them to try and pay back the $1.8 million through a structured civil judgment over the next 20 years. If they refuse, or if they try to negotiate, we have a team of federal prosecutors and local police officers waiting in the lobby downstairs to arrest them both for wire fraud, corporate espionage, and grand larceny. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Qley looked at Derek, her eyes filled with hatred and blame, while Derek looked at her with equal resentment. The great love story and partnership they had built on a foundation of lies, greed, and betrayal had completely shattered in a matter of minutes. This is blackmail, Qley sobbed, looking at me with pleading eyes. Jason, please, you loved me once. You can't do this to me. You can't leave me with nothing. I looked at her, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, clean sense of closure. You didn't care about my love when you were sleeping with my friend in my bed, I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of an absolute final judgment. You didn't care about my life when you tried to steal the company I built with my own blood, sweat, and tears. You made your bed, Qley, and now you get to lie in it. Vance leaned over to Qley, whispering urgently in her ear. I caught the words federal prison, wire fraud, and 20-year sentence. Qley's shoulders slumped, her entire body shaking as she realized she had absolutely no cards left to play. She pulled a pen from her designer purse, her hand trembling so hard she could barely write, and signed her name on the waiver documents. Derek followed immediately after, his face completely hollowed out as he signed away his 5% equity stake, worth over $1.5 million, and signed the full confession of his financial crimes. Once the documents were signed, witnessed, and notarized, Richard stood up, collecting the papers and placing them neatly back into his briefcase. Thank you for your time, Mr. Vance, Richard said politely. We walked out of the conference room, leaving Qley, her mother, and Derek sitting in the ruins of their greed. But the story didn't end there. I was not about to let them off that easily. While I had agreed not to press immediate criminal charges for the embezzlement to get them to sign the waivers quickly, I had made no such promise regarding the corporate espionage. As soon as we walked out of the building, I handed Derek's signed confession and the server log showing his theft of our proprietary source code to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Cybercrimes Division. Stealing proprietary software algorithms across state lines is a federal offense. And since Derek had downloaded the code to launch a rival business funded by stolen money, the FBI took the case incredibly seriously. 2 weeks later, as Derek was packing up his apartment to move into a cheap rental, federal agents raided his home and arrested him for intellectual property theft and corporate espionage. He was prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and with his signed confession as primary evidence, he was sentenced to 7 years in a federal penitentiary. Because Qley was listed as the sole beneficiary of the shell company that funded the espionage, she was indicted as a co-conspirator. She spent every single penny she had left, including the money her parents had, on criminal defense lawyers to avoid jail time. In the end, she managed to secure a plea deal that kept her out of prison, but it came at a catastrophic cost. She was sentenced to 5 years of federal probation, 500 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay full restitution of the $1.8 million to Apex Route. Her reputation in high society was completely, utterly destroyed. The videos of her affair and the details of her corporate theft were leaked to the press by an anonymous source, making her a social pariah in the city. No one would associate with her, no brand would work with her, and her high society friends abandoned her instantly, deleting her from their social media accounts and blocking her phone number. She was forced to sell all of her luxury designer clothes, her jewelry, and even the car I had bought her just to pay her defense attorneys. She ended up moving back into a small, cramped apartment with her mother, Evelyn, who was forced to sell her Florida home to cover her daughter's legal debts. The two of them now live in bitter, miserable poverty, constantly fighting and blaming each other for the disaster they brought upon themselves. Qley now works a low-paying retail job at a local department store, the very same store where she used to spend tens of thousands of dollars on my credit card. Every single month, a significant portion of her meager paycheck is garnished by the court to pay back the restitution she owes to my company. She will be paying me back for the rest of her life, a constant, painful reminder of the husband she tried to ruin. As for Apex Route, the company thrived like never before. With Derek gone and his 5% equity returned to the treasury, I promoted Sarah, our forensic accountant, to chief financial officer, and hired a brilliant, loyal team of executives to lead our expansion. We launched our new, secure logistics platform, which became an overnight industry standard, doubling our company valuation to over $60 million within 12 months. I sold the primary residence, the mansion filled with the ghosts of Qley's betrayal, and bought a beautiful, secluded penthouse overlooking the ocean, where I finally found the peace and quiet I had long forgotten. I look out over the ocean every morning, sipping my coffee in the warm sun, knowing that I built my empire with my own hands, protected it with my own intelligence, and that no one can ever take it away from me. I survived the vipers in my bed and in my office, and I emerged stronger, wealthier, and more at peace than I had ever been in my entire life. Karma had delivered a swift, brutal, and mathematically perfect judgment, leaving the wicked to drown in their own greed while I sailed forward into a bright, limitless future. My newfound peace, however, was about to be challenged by the dying gasps of a cornered beast. Just as Apex Route was preparing for its most significant milestone yet, a planned initial public offering that would take our valuation well over $150 million, the shadows of my past crept back into the light. It started on a rainy Tuesday morning when my executive assistant handed me a sleek, unmarked black envelope that had been hand-delivered to our headquarters. Inside was not a corporate letter, but a series of highly disturbing, glossy photographs of Qley. Her face covered in realistic-looking purple bruises, her eyes red from crying, holding up a newspaper displaying a date from 2 years ago, right in the middle of our marriage. Accompanying the photographs was a typed and signed letter demanding $10 million in cash, to be transferred to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands within 72 hours. If I refused to pay, the letter stated, these photographs, along with a detailed, Fabricated diary chronicling years of horrific physical and emotional abuse at my hands would be sent to every major financial news outlet. Our lead underwriter and the Federal Regulatory Committee overseeing our public offering. I sat at my desk, my hands trembling not with fear, but with a cold, boiling fury as I stared at the blatant, desperate attempt to destroy everything I had built at the exact moment of its greatest vulnerability. An allegation of domestic violence, even a completely fabricated one, would cause immediate, catastrophic damage to our public offering, forcing our underwriters to pull out and causing our board of directors to panic. I immediately called Richard and Sarah into my office, locking the door behind them and spreading the contents of the black envelope across my glass desk. Richard picked up one of the photographs, examining it closely under the desk lamp before passing it to Sarah, his face hardening into a mask of pure professional anger. This is a classic extortion play, Jason, and it is timed with absolute precision to leverage the extreme sensitivity of the upcoming public offering, Richard said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. They know that even if you are eventually vindicated, the mere public accusation of abuse would delay the listing, cost the company tens of millions in investor confidence, and potentially force the board to ask you to step down as chief executive officer. Sarah was already scanning the digital copies of the photographs on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she ran a metadata analysis on the files. The digital signatures on these images have been wiped, but the lighting and shadows on Qley's face are highly inconsistent with natural bruising, Sarah observed, pointing to her screen. This is professional theatrical makeup, likely applied by someone who knows exactly how to make a cosmetic injury look authentic under specific camera flashes. But we need more than just our word to prove this is a setup. We need to find out who is pulling the strings and where these photos were taken. I leaned forward, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. It has to be Qley and Evelyn, I said. They're drowning in debt, Qley's wages are being garnished, and they know the public offering is my crown jewel. But they don't have the resources or the intelligence to coordinate an international extortion scheme on their own. Someone else is helping them. Richard agreed, and we immediately authorized Marcus, our trusted private investigator, to put a 24-hour surveillance detail on both Qley and her mother. We also decided to play along with the extortionists to buy ourselves precious time, instructing Richard to send a highly controlled, anxious response to the anonymous email address listed in the extortion letter. Our response stated that we were highly concerned about the allegations, that we wanted to protect the company's reputation at all costs, and that we needed 72 hours to coordinate the liquidation of assets to meet the $10 million demand. The trap was set, and we waited for the rats to take the bait. Within less than 12 hours, Marcus hit pay dirt, sending us a secure video file taken from a hidden camera across the street from the dilapidated apartment complex where Qley and Evelyn were currently living. The video showed a sleek, expensive sports car pulling up to the curb and a man in a tailored gray suit stepping out, carrying a leather briefcase. It was none other than Arthur Vance, Qley's former divorce attorney, who had supposedly been dismissed from his firm after the disastrous outcome of our previous deposition. Vance was not acting as a licensed attorney anymore. He had been suspended by the State Bar Association for ethical violations, and he was now operating as a shadow consultant for desperate clients willing to cross legal boundaries. He entered the apartment, and through a high-powered parabolic microphone, Marcus's team was able to capture fragments of their conversation through the thin window panes. "We have him cornered." Evelyn's voice drifted through the static, high-pitched and filled with a manic, greedy excitement. "He will pay the $10 million. He has no choice. If that public offering falls apart, he loses $50 million overnight." Vance's voice was lower, smooth, and calculating. "Just make sure you keep your mouth shut and don't spend a single dollar of the transfer until we have safely routed it through the shell accounts in Belize. If Jason tries to involve the police..." I have a contact at a local community clinic who has already agreed to backdate medical records confirming you were treated for contusions during the marriage. I listened to the recording in my war room, my heart pounding with a fierce, cold satisfaction. They had just handed us the entire conspiracy on a silver platter. But we needed to secure the absolute proof of the fabricated medical records before we could strike. Sarah went to work on the medical clinic Vance had mentioned, utilizing her financial tracking software to monitor the personal bank accounts of every doctor and administrator at the facility. Within 6 hours, she found a highly suspicious cash deposit of $25,000 into the personal account of a Dr. Julian Ross, a disgraced physician who had repeatedly been investigated for prescribing unauthorized narcotics and falsifying medical reports. The deposit had been made just 3 days prior, and the cash had been deposited at an automated teller machine located just 2 blocks from Arthur Vance's private residence. We had the financial link, we had the conspiracy on tape, and we had the corrupt doctor who was willing to commit perjury to destroy my life. Richard immediately contacted the federal prosecutor who had handled Derek's corporate espionage case, presenting the new evidence of extortion, blackmail, and conspiracy. Because the extortion demanded funds to be sent to an international offshore account, and because it directly threatened a pending federal securities listing, the federal authorities took immediate, absolute jurisdiction over the case. They set up an elaborate sting operation, instructing me to agree to a face-to-face meeting with Qley and Vance to hand over the digital transfer keys for the $10 million. The meeting was set to take place at a private, high-security conference room in a luxury hotel downtown, a neutral ground where the extortionists felt they would be safe from local police interference. I arrived at the hotel accompanied by Richard, carrying a secure, government-monitored laptop that contained a dummy wire transfer portal designed to look identical to a Swiss banking interface. When we entered the room, Qley was sitting at the table, looking highly disheveled despite her attempts to dress in her remaining designer clothes. She looked older, her face drawn and haggard from months of stress, poverty, and public humiliation, but her eyes still burned with the same toxic, desperate greed. Beside her sat Arthur Vance, looking smug and victorious, believing he was about to secure a multi-million-dollar payday that would restore his lost wealth and reputation. "You made the right decision, Jason," Vance said, leaning back in his leather chair and tapping his fingers on the table. "This is just a small price to pay to ensure your company's historic debut on the stock market goes off without a single hitch. Once the transfer is confirmed, the photographs, the diary, and the medical records will be permanently deleted, and you will never hear from us again." I looked at Qley, ignoring Vance entirely, wanting to see if there was even a single shred of humanity left in the woman I had once loved. "Is this really what you want, Qley?" I asked, my voice soft, almost sad. "You want to steal $10 million from me through blackmail, after everything you already did to destroy my trust?" Qley sneered, leaning forward, her voice trembling with a bitter, toxic rage. "You left me with nothing, Jason. You threw me out like garbage, made me a joke to all my friends, and forced me to work a humiliating job for minimum wage. You deserve this. You deserve to feel what it is like to have your entire world ripped away from you in an instant. I don't care about your trust, and I don't care about your company. I want my money, and I want to see you crawl." I nodded slowly, letting her words hang in the silent room, knowing that every single syllable she spoke was being recorded by federal agents listening in from the adjacent suite. "Well, Qley, I am not going to crawl," I said, reaching over and opening the laptop on the table. "And you are never going to see a single penny of my money." Vance's expression changed instantly from smug satisfaction to sharp, defensive suspicion as he stood up from his chair. "What is this, Jason? If you are trying to play games, I will send the files to the press right now," Vance threatened, reaching for his mobile phone. Before he could touch the screen, the double doors of the conference room burst open, and a team of 6 heavily armed federal agents, accompanied by the lead federal prosecutor, stepped into the room. "Federal agents, step away from the table and put your hands on your heads," the lead agent commanded, his voice echoing like thunder in the confined space. Qley let out a high-pitched, terrified shriek, her knees giving out as she fell back into her chair, her face turning a ghastly shade of gray. Vance tried to protest, his legal training kicking in as he raised his hands, his voice cracking with panic. "This isn't a legal setup. My client is merely negotiating a civil settlement. We have rights," he stammered. "Save it for the judge, Mr. Vance," the federal prosecutor replied, stepping forward and tossing a thick stack of federal arrest warrants onto the glass table. "You, Qley Sterling and Evelyn Sterling are being arrested for federal extortion, interstate wire fraud, conspiracy to commit perjury, and blackmail. We have your phone lines tapped, we have your bank transfers to Dr. Ross documented, and we have your entire confession on high-definition video." At that exact moment, a separate federal task force was raiding Qley's apartment, arresting Evelyn as she sat on the sofa waiting for the phone call confirming the money had arrived. Another team was arresting Dr. Julian Ross at his medical clinic, seizing the backdated medical files and the $25,000 in cash that had been paid to him to falsify the abuse allegations. Qley was handcuffed right in front of me, her body shaking with violent, uncontrollable sobs as the agents lifted her from her chair. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic pleading, trying to find some mercy in the face of the man she had tried to destroy twice. "Jason, please, don't let them take me," she cried, her voice cracking as the handcuffs clicked into place around her wrists. "I was desperate, my mother made me do it. Please tell them to stop." I didn't say a word. I simply watched as the agents led her and Vance out of the room in shame, their dreams of wealth and vengeance completely shattered. The fallout from their desperate scheme was swift, brutal, and absolutely final. Because Qley was already on federal probation for her involvement in Derek's corporate espionage and embezzlement scheme, this new arrest constituted a catastrophic violation of her release terms. Her bail was immediately denied, and she was remanded to a high-security federal holding facility to await trial. Evelyn, too, was denied bail, her role in coordinating the logistics of the extortion and managing the bribery of Dr. Ross making her a primary target of the prosecution. Arthur Vance, facing a mountain of federal charges that carried a mandatory minimum sentence of 15 years, realized he had absolutely no defense. In a desperate bid to reduce his own prison sentence, Vance turned on Qley and Evelyn, agreeing to testify as the state's star witness and providing the prosecution with detailed logs, text messages, and emails planning the entire extortion scheme from day one. He also detailed how they had hired a professional makeup artist to paint the fake bruises on Qley's face, and how they had planned to use the $10 million to flee to a luxurious estate in a non-extradition country in South America once the transfer was complete. Dr. Julian Ross also pleaded guilty, surrendering his medical license permanently and agreeing to testify about the bribery in exchange for a reduced sentence in a minimum security facility. 6 months later, the final trial concluded with a devastating, sweeping victory for justice. Qley was convicted on all counts, her probation was formally revoked, and she was sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of parole. Her mother, Evelyn, was sentenced to 8 years for her role in the conspiracy and bribery, her advanced age doing nothing to sway the judge, who publicly condemned her for her toxic, greed-driven manipulation of her daughter and her absolute lack of remorse. They were sent to separate federal prisons, their glamorous lives of luxury, designer clothes, and high society permanently replaced by rough prison uniforms, concrete walls, and the cold, harsh reality of their own making. The tabloid journalist who had agreed to publish the fake story was sued into absolute oblivion by my legal team, resulting in the permanent shutdown of his media outlet and a multi-million-dollar defamation judgment that left him completely bankrupt. With the threat permanently neutralized, Apex Route's initial public offering went ahead exactly as planned, without a single delay or negative press article. The market's response to our listing was nothing short of historic. On the day of our debut on the New York Stock Exchange, our stock price surged by over 60% within the first hour of trading. Driven by overwhelming investor confidence in our technology, our financial stability, and our clean corporate governance. By the time the closing bell rang, Apex Route was valued at an astounding $280 million, making my personal majority share of the company worth well over $180 million. I stood on the balcony of the exchange, watching my company's ticker symbol flash in bright green across the giant screens of Times Square, surrounded by my loyal team, including Richard and Sarah, who had stood by me through every single storm. We popped bottles of vintage champagne, celebrating not just a financial triumph, but the absolute, undeniable victory of truth, hard work, and integrity over greed, treachery, and malice. I returned to my oceanfront penthouse that night, the city lights reflecting off the dark, calm waters of the Pacific below me. There were no more ghosts in my home, no more hidden threats lurking in my offices, and no more vipers sleeping in my bed. The people who had tried to steal my life, my work, and my reputation were locked away behind iron bars, left with nothing but their own bitter, miserable thoughts to keep them company for the next decade. I sat down on my terrace, the cool night breeze carrying the scent of salt water and fresh air, and let out a long, deep breath of absolute, uninterrupted peace. I had built my empire from nothing. I had defended it against the ultimate betrayal, and I had emerged not just victorious, but completely, absolutely free.